It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, David Malott, who is the former CTBUH Chairman and founder and CEO of AI. David?
Thank you, Tanya, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. Well, first of all, I really hope everyone has been staying safe and well. It's been a crazy past few months, I think, for most of us, but it's glad to see that you are all pulling through. It's getting better here. I'm in New York, but there's parts of the world, I think, where COVID is still a problem. So hearts go out to everyone. So that being said, we have a great panel today, I think, to talk about this and other issues, beginning with Harry Badham. Okay, and Harry is the head of UK development at AXA Real Estate. He's overall responsibility for the UK development portfolio. He joined AXA in 2011 to set up the UK development business line. Previously, Harry was the investment director of a private UK property investment and development business, Allied London, and prior to that, worked at JLL in the corporate finance department. So thank you, Harry, for joining us, and please go ahead.
Thanks, David, and good afternoon, everybody. Can we go to the next slide, Tanya? The subject really of this debate is technology and buildings, but before we get into that, I think it's important to make sure there's a differentiation between the virtual world and what my teenage children call IRL, which for those of you who don't know means in real life. And there is a big difference. On the left-hand side of this slide are the numbers of users for some of those well-known tech brands that we all use. 2.6 billion, I mean, it's half the world nearly. And on the right-hand side is the UK's busiest shopping centre, Westfield, London, 27 million people. The UK's busiest tourist attraction, Tate Modern, 6 million. And the bottom slide is what we're talking about today, the City of London, 500,000 people a day. So really, in terms of the real world, it's peanuts compared to the reach of the technology giants. We go to the next slide, Tanya. This is the existential question, I guess, we're debating a lot, and is the first reaction from a lot of people is, hey, we've all been working from home, isn't it great? Everyone's been surprised on the upside. Couldn't we do away with offices entirely? I don't believe that personally. I don't believe you can do it for a number of reasons. I'm sure we'll talk them through in great detail. I think it's important as well to remember that the technology we have now is really quite nascent, and actually it will get better. And some of the elements that we can't deliver on, whether it's through webinars or Zoom meetings that can't be delivered now, I'm sure the technology would evolve to do that. Next slide, please, Tanya. And I guess this is the point, and we're hopefully starting to see it across the world now, that lockdowns are being released. And what's the first thing people do? Well, they meet other people. This is a 10,000 year process of humans combining together in cities, in conurbations, of meeting, of collaborating, and that doesn't stop because of a 3-month, 6-month, 9-month period of enforced distancing. Some of these examples well, all these examples are taken from the UK, and they show that very kind of human need to get out, meet people, see people, and do things other than just living in that virtual world. Next slide, please. So what does that mean to the office? From our point of view, as a major investor across Europe in office buildings particularly, but also other real estate, we see that real life buildings will continue to be the stage set for real life. And actually, what's happening now in this acceleration that we're going through is actually a way to be more human rather than less human. And this slide shows us that the far left-hand side is the concept of a Greek agora, where 2,000 years ago, building on early cities, the center of a city was a place where people met, they talked, they invented ideas, they did business, they ate together, And it's really only more recently, in the last 100 years, the 1900s and into the 2000s, that we began seeing offices or city centres as specialised workhouses where we lined up people at desks to trade or to fulfil task-based jobs. I think what we've been seeing happening over the last 5 or 10 years in the office sector is that offices are becoming far more varied, far more important as a space of culture, collaboration, of shared consciousness for organizations, less about just task-based work. And I think what we're seeing is that will continue to happen, and we need to use technology to enhance that rather than to replace it. Next slide. I think that's me done for now. Oh, sorry, one more slide. Sorry, Tanya, one more slide. So specifically, this comes into the specifics of buildings themselves and how kind of creating the agora or the shared environment. Really, for us, it's kind of 3 key things: intelligent management, and Grimes will come on, I'm sure, to talk about what we've done with Microsoft around fault detection and diagnosis, basically using information to manage buildings better, using data, learning from that data, keeping records in a new way, and we'll talk about how that's reacting and able to react to changes in circumstances, which is particularly relevant at the moment. Secondly, connectivity. You know, that's really like power was 50 years ago. Having connectivity across Wi-Fi, cellular, and fiber is absolutely fundamental to operating any successful space. And finally, and this is for us absolutely the key behind all of this, is making places easy to use for the people who use them, making what we call people-centered buildings. So instead of getting user-unfriendly cards or printed bits of paper to get in and out of buildings, actually just joining that up with what people are expecting and what they achieve in airports or cinemas, and allowing some element of user control over your environment. We're all used to that and we expect it. So whilst we say those are what we seek to achieve, and some of our partners on our buildings are listed there, what we don't see real estate doing, and what we don't see technology in real estate doing, is becoming some sort of buzzword or label. We don't see us trying to create a social networking platform because, as we showed on the first slide, we just don't have the critical mass for it. We don't see it as being an advertising revenue stream. You know, we are investors in real estate. We generate places and we rentalize them. We don't create advertising. It doesn't serve our users. And finally, and this is a key point in all of this, is we don't see technology being a replacement for the personal and the human interaction. And we have all become a little schizophrenic, and I don't use that word in its medical sense. I use it in a sense that we want things to be super easy in technology and don't have to deal with call centers or people for the standard things in our life. But at the same time, we want to create experiences and have human interactions and have that kind of connection that goes with meeting real people in real life. That is me definitely done, David. So back to you. You're on mute, David.
Thank you, Harry, and thank you for lending us the developer's perspective. If any of the attendees have questions for Harry or any of the panelists, you can enter at any time. You'll see a little Q&A icon in the bottom of your right-hand screen. Feel free to pre-populate a list of questions. Next up, we'll be hearing from Giulia Frittoli and Kai-Uwe Bergmann, both from BIG Architects. Giulia will be presenting on behalf of BIG for the Toyota Woven City. So Giulia joined BIG in 2017 as a senior landscape designer with a multidisciplinary background in urban design, architecture, and landscape architecture. She led the proposal for Toyota Woven City, investigating how recent technologies will shape the future of cities in relation to new forms of mobility, sustainability, ecology, and human connectivity. So Giulia, without further ado.
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. I'm Giulia Frittoli from Bjarke Ingels Group. And I'm going to talk to you today on how we imagine COVID can change New York City. The COVID timeline is pretty much unknown, but we know today that the immediate future will change. But New York has an extensive experience in turning crises into new opportunities. When the cholera pandemic hit New York City, New York changed its sewer system. When the city was overcrowding at the beginning of the 20th century, New York built parks and open spaces. With the advanced engineering developed for the World War II, it helped building the national highway system. After 9/11, we all saw an increase on security and safety measures. And after Hurricane Sandy, the city responded with new flood protection measures, such as the Big U, which today is the largest project we have in the office. I've been leading, COVID-19 represents today the opportunity for New York to change its public realm and its streets. And as David mentioned, I've been leading for the past 2 years the Toyota Woven City project, exploring ways to reimagine the future of our cities. And autonomous shared mobility can change the streets. If we divide the streets into 3 different mobility types, we can have one road for autonomous vehicles, and maybe a promenade for bikes, buses, and other forms of mobility, or a green linear park for pedestrians and nature. And these streets can weave together in what we call the woven city to create a new city, an accessible, walkable, and connected city. The woven city is actually a new form of an urban grid that we conceived as a grid to be applicable to cities that exist today. So think about the Wove NYC. So imagine keeping some of the New York City streets as basic traffic networks, but changing others into green linear parks for the community, or turning streets into boulevards for bikes and buses. And I think when we think about the future of workplace, we need to think about the future of commute. Today in New York, most of us commute by subway. But we know that the subway system is overcrowded, which doesn't make it easy for social distancing. And despite this, during the coronavirus lockdown, a lot of essential workers actually traveled by subway, not having a valid alternative. And definitely cars are not a valid alternative because of traffic congestion, especially during peak hours. But again, we learned that during the coronavirus lockdown, by just reducing the traffic, the air pollution reduced. So what we learned is that we need to change the public realm of New York City. And the sidewalks alone cannot handle the social distancing that is required today. But definitely we have great news. So New York has already been changing and transforming its streets. For instance, think about the Open Streets program, where some of the road network today is changing to create more space for pedestrians, bikes, and other forms of mobility. Just at the beginning of the year, the open streets were a few in New York City. But today, during the coronavirus lockdown, we saw an increase, and each community in New York today has several. So we can really build upon the Open Street program and the future connected bike lane system of New York City to create a new connected system, a new network that connects the parks, the urban destination, and the urban center to form a new Wove NYC, a new grid that offers a wide range of mobility options for people to commute and connect. Thank you.
Thank you, Giulia. So Giulia and her partner, Kai-Uwe, and I guess at this point I should introduce Kai-Uwe. He will be joining us for the panel chat later. So Kai-Uwe is a partner at BIG, who brings his architectural expertise to proposals around the globe, including work in North America, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. He heads up BIG's business development, which currently has the office working in over 35 different countries. So yeah, thank you, Giulia and Kai-Uwe. Beautiful project. It's actually in my home country of Japan. I really look forward to seeing that built. So, okay, next up we have Rhymes Mortimer. Rhymes is the general manager of Microsoft's Applied Innovation team, where he is leading new industry across industry areas such as smart buildings and cities, environmental sustainability, predictive maintenance and operations. With a graduate degree in architecture and environmental studies, Rhymes has worked in the construction and facilities management fields before joining Microsoft in 2000, where he has held many different roles focused on innovation. Rhymes?
Thanks so much, David, for the introduction. And I really am excited to speak to everyone today about how technology is and will continue to transform our spaces. Next slide. The convergence of a number of technologies is digitally transforming just about every business and every business process globally. And as a result of cloud computing, the emergence of the Internet of Things, Internet Cloud, and Intelligent Edge, where billions of devices are producing trillions of gigabytes of data, which can then be analyzed by AI and machine learning, we're able to get new insights about how our products, our factories, our buildings, and even entire cities are performing. I wanted to open with this overview as it really does talk to how technology and data will transform our understanding of our built environments, and not just what has happened in terms of systems of record, but what is happening in near real time, a system of reality. We're leveraging this new technology and capability to literally create digital replicas of our physical world. Next. We refer to this new capability as Azure Digital Twins, and it is helping us bring together the physical and digital worlds in ways we've never imagined before. And while connected sensors and devices help us learn more about our products, our machines, our cars, our buildings, the very spaces we occupy, and how those spaces are performing, who's using them, how they're optimized for productivity, we're also effectively using digital signals to create better experiences, like finding a parking spot, an open office, a colleague, or a meeting room. Digital twins for us are about the ability to graph the relationship between people, spaces, devices, and sensors that will not only unlock new insights into how the built world is performing, but more importantly, how we can simulate what might happen, something we can't do in the real world. So for example, imagine simulating space usage and traffic pattern flow before any space is constructed. At Microsoft, for our own buildings and campuses, we're using digital modeling for a number of scenarios, like simulating the time to exit a building in the event of an emergency like a fire. Next slide. So what is the impact of technology in buildings, and what value does that technology deliver? So let me start with energy management. Here, organizations like ours and many of our customers like AXA are using IoT and data insights gained from sensors on building systems like elevators, HVAC infrastructure, lighting, and chillers to better understand how equipment is performing, and then using AI and ML to determine potential failures or faults. Using this insight, we can remotely repair the faults, or we can send the right person with the right skills to make the repair. The net impact of these types of solutions is a positive ROI in 18 months and a dramatic savings in energy consumption of between 15 and 25%, not to mention how it's helping customers meet some of their corporate sustainability goals like carbon emission reduction. The next area is around space optimization. And leasing space is often the second biggest cost for most organizations after employees' salaries and benefits. So using a myriad of technologies from simple Bluetooth beacons to Wi-Fi triangulation, we can better understand space usage in ways we haven't been able to do before. And where it's not optimized, we can either reconfigure the space for improved usage and productivity, or as we've seen in some of our own office facilities, simply stop leasing it. The third area is an exciting one for me because we can now leverage digital signals and insights from productivity applications like Microsoft Office to help us get smarter about who we collaborate with, spend time with in meetings, share documents and emails with, and then use that data to do better space planning. This includes to determine which departments or organizations should be co-located on a floor or in a building to optimize for productivity. Next slide. Look, there's no question the COVID-19 pandemic has and will have a profound impact on our workspace. As millions were forced to work from home as part of social distancing, the dramatic rise of new collaboration technologies like Zoom and our own Microsoft Teams have perhaps changed the work approaches forever. In just 2 months, we saw our Teams usage double to now 75 million users. And in April, we supported nearly 4.2 billion virtual calls in a single day. But getting back to the office will be different, and technology will play an increasingly important role to help make our spaces safe, from helping us to spot folks who are not social distancing or wearing the proper face gear, to an expansion of office space to support greater distances between desk workers, and new tools to help us understand in real time which spaces have been sanitized. We'll see the rise of systems that allow secure touchless access to buildings that use the same facial technology that helps you log onto your Windows computer, voice-controlled elevators, even air quality alerts about CO2 levels, or which spaces have people in them, and which routes you can take to cross the floor to minimize contact or possible contamination. Contact tracing solutions that use Bluetooth, radar, even Wi-Fi technologies will be deployed. So should one person confirm positive, we can retroactively determine who they might have been in contact with and alert those people. Like all of you, we're exploring these types of solutions for our own employees and to deploy in our own facilities. We are working with developers like RXR in New York, who are paving new ways to make buildings and workplaces safer. There are clearly going to be challenges in how we walk the line of personal data sharing and protection. But people want to know the environment is safe and healthy, and technology like Azure Digital Twins will play a central role in enabling that. Thanks, David. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. It's incredible to see how much the technology has been advancing and how on point I think it is to address what we've been learning from COVID these days.
Yep, agree.
Okay, so next up to speak about what Siemens is doing, Martin Powell. So Martin is the head of sustainability for Siemens Corporation and global lead for urban development. He was the former deputy mayor of London for energy environment for Boris Johnson and was a special advisor for the C40 cities chaired by former mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg. Martin has authored several publications, the latest Smart Cities, Cities in the Digital Age. So go ahead, Martin.
Hello. I'm going to pivot to the role of our buildings delivering future cities. We've modeled over 70 cities to assess technologies needed to meet aggressive climate goals. Next slide, please. Next slide, Tanya. Great. We looked at 11 cities in North America and over 278 technologies that we identified and what's required to reach carbon neutrality. The findings were very clear. Buildings are central to the future transformation. We actually have to turn our buildings into mini power stations using efficient decentralized generation that will also build resilience and reliability. And actually, above all, affordability. We have to electrify our fleets, buses, cars, everything. And the relationship of our buildings to our car charging, again, is going to lead this transition. And we have to connect our buildings to our grid, our energy supply, so that they talk in real time, to that every watt of power is used or stored and absolutely not lost. And this will open hundreds of IoT solutions that will incrementally improve the infrastructure around us. If you look at this chart, it's clear that our buildings will catalyze the survival of our planet. Each city is absolutely unique, and it must begin this journey in the right sequence to ensure we protect our communities and our citizens' equitably, bringing everyone along on that journey. Next slide, please. Poverty. I'm not seeing it. There we go. Poverty, terrorism, urban unrest, and flooding are increasing in the biggest 60 cities in the world without exception. And without these steps, we will not begin to address these trends or be able to deal with the consequences of them. And continuing the theme of Manhattan that Giulia showed, I just saw a study that the long-term exposure to air pollution and the relationship with COVID-19 deaths, if Manhattan had lowered its average of fine particulates from 12 micrograms per cubic meter to by just 1 microgram, we would have had 248 fewer COVID-19 deaths in New York City alone, and that was published a month ago. So that number of deaths would have we would have saved would have been higher. So buildings playing their role in driving electrification will make a really huge impact. Next slide, please. And finally, you know, we will return to our offices and buildings. You know, I agree with Harry on this. You know, our buildings will be filled again. The human race has repeatedly shown it can innovate and utilize technology to solve problems. We have our enlightened technology that will enable us to really make this solution work for us to be able to get back into our workspaces again, because our buildings will really lead us back to our productive best. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Martin.
Hi guys, I've got a question for you actually.
Yeah, there we go.
Harry, this one's for you. So, hi guys, I'm Sean Mills, also helping out with the CTBUH, but I've heard, talking to my clients, there's still a lot of misconception and things that aren't quite understood around the pandemic and virus transfer. So you're bombarded by the news cycle every day, so everyone's really got a lot of fear around it. And I believe they do want to come back to work, but as an asset owner and a developer, I mean, what steps are you taking in your buildings to kind of update them or refresh them to bring that confidence back to the community so they will come back in droves?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Sean. And you know, at a macro sense, what we're trying to do is distinguish between what's a short-term trend or a short-term reaction. Just yeah, I think Big's presentation showed it really well, that we get these times every 10 years that we get a major change, but sometimes that leads to permanent change, sometimes it leads to temporary change. So what we're trying to do is make sure we distinguish between the two so that we don't either overreact or underreact. I think the other point I'd make is we've got, you know, several buildings we're developing and we've got pre-committed tenants to, and we've obviously got a big portfolio all across Europe and globally of tenants who almost universally want to come back to the office. The thing that is preventing businesses coming back to the office is not the office. I think pretty much everyone I speak to, either at a professional level or with our occupiers and tenants, pretty much everyone I speak to is comfortable that they can create a safe working environment once you're in an office. And that, you know, we can come on to detail, but that includes lifts and entrances and common areas and all the other things. Where they are restricted at the moment is obviously government advice, but more so is around the use of public transport. So, you know, CBDs work because they are, you know, to take our 22 Bishopsgate, we've got 20 million people within a 1-hour commute. CBDs work and have grown like that since Mesopotamia, because you can get the most number of people into that area through the infrastructure. But as soon as you cut that infrastructure, it doesn't make it any less attractive long term, and it doesn't mean that long term trend is going to change. And I personally don't believe we'll all of a sudden start going back to being you know, rural, rural dwellers or cities will stop growing, but it does mean that we need, in the short term, to figure out how we're going to deal with that. So things like, and I'm only talking about this and I'm not answering your question because I think it's much more important to talk about how are we going to deal with the streets, how are we going to get people to it. We have, within 22 Bishopsgate, we've got 1,500 cycle bays, and we had originally called that a cycle park. We now call it our active commuter park, and we call it that because it covers walking, running, scooters, e-bikes, you know, any manner that people can get in. The other thing we're looking at is how can we free up the roads? Again, to take 22 Bishopsgate, from the very beginning of that development, we instigated this concept of consolidated deliveries. And again, that's a technology-driven. That wasn't possible before the technology was there to track and trace deliveries. But by doing it, we take about 90% of the number of deliveries a day off the road. So normally we'd be having 500 or 600 deliveries. We can get that down to 60 or 70. Again, freeing up the streets. And I think this is a time for the cities to be radical. Like Kai-Uwe's and Giulia's presentation, cities can be radical about getting cars off the street, making the street a place that people are using for transport, so that you've kind of evened it out. The final point on transport is it's crazy the way we all commute at 9 o'clock in the morning or 8:30 in the morning, but actually that peak can be spread across the day. Technology, people's own devices allows that. So we should allow our transport systems to breathe. The capacity on London's transport systems is unbelievable, but there's half an hour each end of the day that it can't cope.
That's a really great answer.
I've answered your question. I will now answer your question about what are we doing. We have a massive management team mobilized on our biggest project. We've set out a complete roadmap for what we're dealing with. Ultimately, it's impossible to give final answers because we're still monitoring the science behind it. We're still monitoring the government response. But there is a roadmap, and it includes simple things like the ability for us to integrate our touchless access controls. It allows the ability for us to potentially allocate lifts to individual bubbles of tenants, so that you can have one set of tenants only using that lift. All of these systems, the great benefit of having, Ryan has talked about digital twins, the great benefit of that is we've got real-time open control of all these systems. And if we need to run the lifts in a different way, by making it either touchless or allocating lifts to certain tenants so that you're not mixing groups of people, we can do that using the technology. Again, things that wouldn't have been possible 10 years ago.
Great answer, Harry. I think it's a really great segue too. And I'd like to, you know, if we want to talk about being radical in our cities, I think Kai and Giulia, what do you think? What have you got for us that's radical on that line?
I do think, as Giulia mentioned, that workplace is not only defined by the place of our desk. Workplace is very much from the moment that you're actually moving from your home to your workplace, or the entire experience also within your own home or workplace. And I think that that's why we have sort of focused on the public realm aspect of this. And that I think that that is also where you can have some truly radical change. I do agree with everyone that the Internet of Things and the technology software that we can sort of place into the hardware of our buildings will offer us a lot of further control on vertical transportation systems, air filtration systems, and the kind of usage patterns and wayfinding. I think more intuitively, radicalness will and should also really be invested into our public realm. Density is being challenged by this pandemic, and how we approach density of our cities and how we can actually utilize the very spaces that we already have around us in more flexible ways, and to create redundancies in those networks, so that when one system fails us, like let's say the public transportation system, we have a redundancy network of bike paths and of sort of e-scooters and such that also allow us to move and to get to places. Finally, I think that the workplace may transform fundamentally in one where right now we go to a workplace to sit in front of our desks for a certain number of hours, and we may actually go out and meet with people in various locations for presentations and for interactions. Imagine that we now, in a way, could work anywhere from our laptop, from our homes, from the park. And actually, the workplace is actually where we go to have those social interactions, and that the workplace becomes more of a place to, like the Agora, to exchange ideas and to use it, again, in a more flexible sort of format than today, which is to go and sit at a desk for 8 hours or more, and then sort of commute back and forth. There's a lot of flexibility that I think we can imagine quite differently.
Fantastic. Dave, are you back?
Yeah, and thank you, Sean, for jumping in. Hopefully everyone can hear me now. I was just about to say like how the tech and the Zoom and everything have really enabled us to keep functioning, but I guess there's always the inevitable breakdowns. But I was just listening to what Kai was saying, and yeah, and maybe you've already been talking about this, but I was just thinking like, you know, are there other forms of density or other forms of sort of organization as a society that can leverage tech that isn't necessarily a tall building? Or the flip side of that, like how should a tall building be different? Is there something that we've learned if you were to go out and Harry build a new one, or Kai-Uwe to design a new one? What would you be doing differently?
Well, I first and foremost, just very briefly, I do respect so much that the Council of Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat places similar emphasis not only on tall buildings, but urban habitat, the public realm as we kind of define it. And I do think that that's a balance that you have to find now, in the past, and also moving forward.
Yeah, we get asked a lot because it's a tall building. That, you know, our biggest project at the moment is a tall building in the centre of London. We get asked a lot about lifts, and it's perhaps people's knee-jerk reaction is to think that's impossible. But the reality is, any building that's more than 4 or 5 stories, you need a lift. And then the question is, how many lifts have you got, and how fast and how smart are the lifts? You know, we have Hall-cooled double-deck destination-cooled lift systems, which have got 64 lifts in a building for about probably 10,000, 12,000 people. So per meter squared of density, we've got more lifts and faster lifts than any building, any older building. So lifts is not the problem at all. We can deal with the populations we're getting in. We can socially distance them. We can segregate them. We can manage those lifts smart. We can even out the rush hour peaks. I personally, when you start thinking about the detail of specification, tall buildings shouldn't create any constraints that you have anywhere else.
Just to pile on, David, I think and we've been doing a lot of work with TKE and Kone and Otis and a number of those organizations that supply technology, especially vertical transportation to buildings. I mean, in a way, you have to think about vertical transportation as part of the logistics journey management experience. And I think more and more, we're going to want to know, predict when is the best time to go into the office? How long will it take me to get to these, to the spaces and meet with the people that I really care about? And we'll have much more insight through the data that's coming off the elevators, data through the lobbies of hotels, from the streets, the traffic patterns, to give people, when they do decide, as you said, go to the Agora or go to the office, and fundamentally that's going to be about collaboration, much more insight into, so how long will it take me? Where's the parking spot? Should I leave this time? And I think this is what you were talking about, David, about the whole notion of it's not a 9 o'clock everyone arrives. That'll be a change. It'll be, I'm coming in for specific events or specific opportunities to collaborate, and now I want the technology to help me understand what time I need to leave, when I should do that, because it's not a 9 to 5 experience anymore. It's I'm going there for a specific purpose, and I want to know, when should I leave my house? in order to be exactly at that meeting for 10 o'clock. And that journey management and using all that data is a big part of helping us predict when I should leave and what time it will take to get to collaborate with my colleagues.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and this question is coming in from Agostino Ghirardelli from Milan. Along a similar vein here, but are there actually changing needs for company and employee habits in terms of the use of space and share between home working and office-based working? So has there actually been a tectonic shift that might challenge this need for density in the cities and the tall buildings?
David, we're working with, as I said, Scott Reckler, RXR, a number of Brookfield and Oxford, a number of these large developer, AXA is another one where we're seeing, interestingly enough, a move to more space, not less, the densification of the office environment. It's been around, I need more space between the individuals, the desks, the hot desking. The other thing we're seeing is that people want to know when that environment has been cleaned. So we're putting, sensors onto some of those desks where someone can come by after someone's used that environment and we can get confirmation that it's been cleaned or wiped down. That's becoming much more prevalent. But I found it amazing in talking to Scott that he's being asked by a number of the Wall Street banks and insurance companies to think about how to densify the office environment as part of a move towards more social distancing.
Mm-hmm. And Harry, I'm just curious about this because it does seem to be a response to sort of social distancing within the office, would seem to imply that, there's sort of be less bang for your buck, I suppose, as a tenant renting a building. So how does the economics of this work if we're sort of de-densifying these buildings and central city environments?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because unlike, say, retail, where you've got a physical, very obvious link between the value of your shop or your shop front, in an office, it's much more opaque and it's much longer term. I personally believe, and we've seen this trend happening for a while, that a lot of companies are looking in their CBDs of having less space but having more valuable space. And that means having the best space in many cases and spending more on making that space really do what it needs to do for the productivity of the organization. So it's a double-edged sword in terms of density. We've seen densities or the specification we've built to as developers go over 10 years from 1 person per 12 square meters was the norm. Then it became 1 to 10. 22 Bishopsgate, and most of our current pipeline, we're building at a density of 1 to 8. Will we ever see it occupied at that density? No way. We built a building for Google in King's Cross, designed to 1 to 8. They probably occupy it. They're probably the lowest density occupier we've ever seen. They have 2 spaces for every individual to sit. They occupy a building at probably 1 to 16, something like that. And I think, whilst in some ways the lawyers have always been low density and have been seen as a bit Luddite in not adapting to open plan environments. Actually now, particularly when we're looking at half the office in and half the office out, you can't run video calls in an open plan office. So perhaps we need to go back to some form of cellularization, which naturally drives density down. So I can see density decreasing. But I can see the sort of peaks of when you have people in for an all-staff meeting, or how you get people to share that kind of shared consciousness of an organization. I can see those peaks changing. We've seen that happening anyway. We did a big tour 5 years ago around Australia, looking at NAB and others like that, who were really starting to use offices in very different ways, rather than just lining up rows of desks. So your question is really, how do we see that? How do we see that affecting the economic model of really the rental cash flow, I suppose, is what you're asking. I actually think, and Rhymes made the point, that your office costs, and look here, 30 years ago, you would be spending 20% of your corporate overhead costs on your office. Today, you're probably spending 5%. So you've already cut significant amount of cost out of your office. but now the real thing is you're spending, if you're spending, I think Rhymes, your slide was 30 on your office, you're spending 300 on your staff. So actually, if it's only 5% of your overhead, spending a little bit more or spending a little bit less doesn't make a big difference to your overall profitability, and you need it. And that's the point I come back to. Every organization, it needs to have a center of shared consciousness. It needs to have a place where people can be mentored, where people can pick things up, where people can generate ideas. That's there's one of the other questions there about what age group are most pressing to get back in. Well, unsurprisingly, it's younger staff, and I find this with our own teams is actually it's people who want to be around the kind of the learning of an office, that environment where you're able to progress your own knowledge and your own experiences. So we are finding, in conclusion, we're not seeing a huge drop-off in the value of an office at all. We've been seeing a trend for a long time about people being very focused on having a smaller core, and then whether they're using flexible solutions or outsourcing their meeting rooms or outsourcing food and beverage. You know, in 22, we've picked up all these things around how people are focusing a smaller core footprint, but the real value of that for decision-making, corporate culture building, training, events, and customer engagement.
That's great. So it's good to hear that. Yeah, ultimately, really comes down to what's good for the people, right? For the employees, and I guess there's a consensus amongst us that there's nothing that can sort of displace that direct human interaction. But I do have a question, and this is coming from the field, and I think I prepped you all yesterday for this because it's a toughie. But it's this other critique of tall buildings, that they are sort of for the product for the elite. I think when we made this topic about will technology save us, it was really done in response to a world-changing event, which was the COVID pandemic. But we've just recently had another, and I'm speaking about the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. And I just have to pose the question, is there something sort of, systemic inequality to the tall building? And is there something we can do to address that?
David, I'll have a first go at that, because I'll pick up something that was just said about will people leave cities, and they won't. Cities will get bigger and they'll get more dense, and they will continue to grow. And buildings are very like roads, streets, is that if there's space on them, they'll get filled. So if businesses end up taking less space, it just means more businesses will have space to use in the city, and this puts more people in circulation, and this is actually a good thing economically. The key is to make it affordable, and of course rents in places like London and New York City are high. So if you can bring these costs down, and if businesses are taking less space, and also in semi-urban areas, then there's an opportunity to bring these rents down. But in order to ensure equality, you need to have good public transport systems connecting places and spaces. Kai's point about green spaces are going to become increasingly important. These are free office workplaces. So if cities design high quality green spaces, then anybody can sit and use them. And this again is going to become increasingly important. And then going back to my kind of my presentation, which was about energy, we have to keep striving to make energy affordable. It has to be clean, it has to be reliable, secure, but it has to be affordable. This is first and foremost, and actually people demand that. And that way we can ensure that as our cities grow, we bring everybody on the journey.
David, if I may, I mean, it's been a huge thing for us in London, and I think we've gone through an age of austerity over the last 10 years, which has highlighted that gap in inequality as well. So this is not something new. It's not something that's been caused now. It's been something that's been going on. We've been very acutely tuned to the responsibility of any kind of large central city centre estate of to what your social obligations are. I think we're probably the first office building to have deliberately hired what we call our head of culture, who is there to give a face to a building in a way that maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we as developers would call it iconic or landmark, or we would talk about the views and we would talk about the specification. When we now engage with people about our buildings, we talk about the environment and the public realm and the art we create and the kind of the softer elements of it. And that's not just kind of developer hogwash. It's because we recognize that that's how you engage with people and that people, all people are becoming more empowered in their businesses to be decision makers. So it's no use anymore just communicating with the chief executive and the finance director of the company. You need to be communicating and reaching out to everyone across an organization to get their buy-in. You know, we've integrated that across the board in our development. So whether it's on one of our projects, for example, we have a commitment to create affordable workspace, which includes a learning component. So we're working with you know, real London universities and institutions to create an environment that can create space for people who are entrepreneurs and innovators to come in and use the space in a building that would otherwise be probably completely inaccessible to them. In our tower building in London 22 Bishopsgate, we're creating a 20,000 square foot public space, which is a viewing gallery. It's free to user, and again, creating cultural uses in there, whether it's art, whether it's music, that allow people to feel that this city is their city. It's not just a series of buildings where there's a big logo on the front door or a big neon sign at the top of the building that says, this is not for you. Our intention has always been to create pieces of city that are for everyone who's a stakeholder in that city.
Yeah, thank you, Harry. It's really wonderful to hear that, truly. We have a little bit more time. I'm just wondering, Kai or Giulia, any thoughts from a design perspective, like what you might be doing? Is there a way to, you know, through design to create greater equity of experience for everybody?
Giulia.
Yes, I think this is key of public spaces, and I think it's really about the network and where the public spaces are located. As when we think about our city today, the public spaces are inequally scattered, and we know that certain neighborhoods have lack of decent and good public spaces and parks and open space. So I think to start thinking about equity, we need to start to thinking about the equity of a network that extends across the city and to all the neighborhoods to make sure the public spaces are connected. And of course, I think this relates also to support different businesses, and more local and small scale businesses should be integrated into the design of the public realm to ensure diversity and to ensure that we respond to the variety and the diversity that characterizes the cities today. So I think location and program and businesses are key to start establishing equality through our public spaces.
And this is where I think that some level of policy making also is, I think, a very important aspect of how to make all of this work. And the sort of systematic structures underlying a lot of the inequities begin at a very kind of political level, policy level. So it's something that I think we as design professionals and as owners of buildings actually do need to kind of open up the conversation to the level of policy making. And that is one thing that I think also would benefit CTBUH in the long run, is to find that level of thought. There's as much creativity in shaping a policy as there is in shaping a building or shaping a cultural plan for that building. I think that the network that we're also proposing with the Woven City gives as much access to a person on a bicycle pedaling as it does using public transportation or the automobile. So really it is, we're looking for some way of equalizing the sort of inequalities that exist.
Excellent, excellent. And yeah, I know we could keep going on this conversation for a long time, and unfortunately we sort of hit our 1 hour mark. But I do thank all the panelists, because it really is opening up, I think, the discourse here at CTBUH. Maybe we'd gotten a little bit too comfortable in our own shoes, I think, having sort of overcome some engineering challenges. But I think the events of this year have really opened that all up and just shown us that we have a lot more work and thinking to do. And it's great to see the role that technology is coming in to address all these issues. But there's, and it's great to see the innovations and just the whole shift in perception coming from developers like Harry, and now with the design community. I think it was very much focused on this problem. It's a new territory that we're all going to start to explore. So I think it's going to be a very interesting time for CTBUH in the next coming years. So I know, Tanya, maybe there's just that one last slide that you can bring up about the next webinar. Okay, so July, sometime later in July, will be the third in this series of online events. Hopefully you're finding them useful. This one will be about the future of construction, specifically advanced manufacturing and modular construction, so details will follow. But yeah, just wanted to take the last opportunity to thank our panelists. I think it was a good discussion and starting to provoke some real ideas. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you everyone in the audience for attending and asking those hard questions.
Great, thank you, David. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank you
for the invitation. Speak
Okay.
soon. Ciao.
Thank you all. Stay safe. Take care.